Hi, this is MotherMantiss. I finished Veilguard a few days ago. I put well over 100 hours into the game. I had all the factions maxed out, all the companion reputations maxed out, and the game was kind of an emotional roller coaster for me, although probably not for the reasons that BioWare intended. Let's talk about it. This is an IP that I've got many hundreds of hours in. I've read all the books, I know the lore pretty well, and I feel pretty confident in my knowledge of the game. I love this series. I've seen primarily two kinds of reviews from content creators on this game. One, lore masters who are so emotionally attached to the game that they're really not capable of any objectivity. And two, the more generalist type of creator who played the earlier games but really are not up on the lore or the story details. What's important to me in an RPG is strong writing, consistent character development, and continuity that respects its own world lore. Those are the values that I look for in an RPG, and that's the perspective from which I'm looking at Dragon Age and the lens through which I'm going to be offering my opinion. So let's talk about it. Veilguard positions itself as a direct sequel to Inquisition and its DLC Trespasser. It takes place a mere 10 years after the events of Trespasser, so one can reasonably expect almost all of the main characters from Inquisition are still alive, and that the political and cultural states in Thedas are what they were in those games. This game focuses on northern Thedas, primarily Tevinter, Rivain, Antiva, the Arlethan Forest, and Weishaupt and its surrounding villages in the Anderfels, which is west of Tevinter. Solas is attempting to enact his ritual to bring down the Veil, and this is the moment where Veilguard begins as your character, Rook, arrives with Varric to stop him. The missions are presented in chapters, narrated by Varric. At the end of each chapter, he sums up what happened. And while I think the game does way too much explaining what's happening and pointing out the obvious, I do like this chapter format. And the animation in this game is beautifully stylized in that classic Dragon Age fashion. It's really well done. I'm not going to talk too much about Veilguard's much vaunted character customization, other than to say that I personally did not find it as comprehensive and inclusive as I had expected it to be. There's sort of a uniformity about the character models that renders them sort of samey, in my opinion. And at the risk of sounding super tacky, I'll mention that the bra makers in Thedas are probably not getting much business. The hair, though, looks the best I've ever seen in a video game, which is amazing for BioWare, and all of the character models are attractive, and I was able to make a Rook that I was satisfied with, and then I got on with the game. I am not in this game for the combat so much as the story. I think I've made that really clear, but early on I thought the combat was fine. There's a lot of visual noise on the screen during fights, although it does look impressive. Your companions have no health bars and they're immortal. Rook is the only one who can die, and Rook seems to draw virtually all of the aggro, even when you've got a companion using taunt, and even, it seemed to me, when you go into your settings and turn aggro to minimum settings. I played on normal mode for the most part, but I did try out the harder modes, and it did not appear to me to change combat much tactically. It really just made the bosses very spongy, and it made the fights last a lot longer, which frankly got to be kind of a drag. Every area is loaded with big, pulsing blight blisters that you had to burst. If it wasn't blisters, then it was crystals. So arriving in a new area meant running around and popping blisters or breaking crystals or both. And honestly, after several hours in the game, that got very repetitive. There were area puzzles similar to what we've seen in the previous games as well, very simplistic in the beginning hours, and although they did increase in complexity as the game went on, they never did get difficult. The graphics and performance were genuinely impressive. I played on high because I was recording, but I also played on ultra when I wasn't recording, and the game ran really well. The game world itself is really beautiful. It's very well realized, great attention to detail. Each region is visually different from the other with different weather conditions and varying degrees of moodiness, and each is evocative of the faction that lives there in a really effective way. The sound, in my opinion, is also handled well. The ambient noises and the chatter in the towns make them feel populated without cluttering your story experience, and it's directional, which adds to your immersion. One detail I really appreciated was Nev's false metal legs sounded different depending on what surface we were walking on. For instance, a muted clop on wood, but a brighter sounding ping on stone. It was a nice little detail. The music in Veilguard is good. It's good at setting a tone when you come into a room, in my opinion, but it's unremarkable. It certainly does not have the impact that Inquisition's music had. Every once in a while, you'll hear something from Inquisition woven into the background music, and then it's really noticeable. But other than that, it's strictly something that does its job, and it does do its job, in setting a mood or telling you that the drama is about to amp up. But you're not going to remember the music when you're finished with the game. Much has been made of the fact that only a few decisions from Inquisition came forward into Veilguard, but the truth is that even those decisions don't really matter at all, except for the last 10 minutes of the game, and only with one potential ending from what I could tell. In writing the story for Veilguard, the BioWare team had a lot of world and cultural and political systems and lore well established over the previous games that Veilguard chooses to simply ignore. It's too much for me to even list here, but here's a couple little examples. Tevinter is a highly racist society that practices and endorses slavery, primarily of elves, as well as a strict class system that is very contemptuous of the non-magical. None of this is evident in Veilguard. In Veilguard's Tevinter, it's just the Venatori cult who are evil. Also, the way the game treats the elves is disconcerting. I would expect city elves to have some variety depending on what city they were raised in, but the Dalish should have, at the very least, consistent accents. The other factions do, but especially the Dalish, whose entire existence has been isolated from other societies. A character's accent helps build a consistent architecture for who they are. Think about the Crows. And for the Dalish, it speaks to their unity as a clan, which should have been important because it has ties to Solas's motivations. The Elves' story is linked to the themes of subjugation, which are intrinsic to the Dragon Age story, and the Dalish tribe's decision to keep isolated and to follow the old ways and to pursue knowledge about their own gods, and for many of them, to follow Fen'Harel. And speaking of Fen'Harel, why are the elves in Veilguard so immediately contemptuous of their own gods and of Solas after literally thousands of years and hundreds of generations of reverence and seeking knowledge of them? Remember, we're only a decade past the last game. How can these people so completely have abandoned everything that made them elven except for their ears? Lastly, on the topic of the Crows, in the Dragon Age world, the Crows are an elite group of thieves, spies, and assassins, known throughout Thedas and loyal only to themselves and whoever has paid them. They bring in orphaned children, basically as slaves. They raise and train them to be assassins for the house. They kill them if they aren't good enough or don't learn fast enough. And they kill them when they're old and worn out after years of work. These are not good people. When you meet Zevran in Origins, he is very charming, but he also makes no bones about who and what he is. And he will tell you when you get to know him that he's known nothing but the business of murder since he was a small child. Veilguard transforms the Crows into a family of Robin Hoods, complete with matching uniforms and espresso machines. If you're a new player, of course, you don't know all this or any of the other stuff I don't have time to mention in this video. So, of course, you can't be bothered by what you don't know. But I don't see how a returning player who claims to care about the lore cannot be bothered by how far Veilguard strays from the established world states and lore and how it has sanitized the factions and the game history in order, presumably, to make sure that no one ever feels remotely uncomfortable while playing this game for one moment. It feels like Veilguard has sanded off all the edges of the world, anything that might be mildly offensive, any theme that might be possibly controversial. The story's an inch deep and intellectually unchallenging because no mission ever comes near the complicated themes in this world that it could have explored. And no character or companion that the game wants you to like has a problematic character flaw that you're forced to morally reckon with. Early in the game, you're forced to make a choice between which cities to defend. Of course, the goal is to amp up the drama and the stakes, but it's a decision that has virtually no consequences other than the inability to romance one companion if you allow Treviso to be destroyed. But he'll still be your ally, and you can still gain max reputation with him and his faction. Interestingly, though, if you allow Minrathous to be destroyed, the companion associated with Minrathous is still romanceable, and you can still max out her and her faction's reputation. And the game is full of choices like this to one degree or another. Choices that appear to mean something, but really have no consequences whatsoever. Everyone will still always like you and still always support you. Go team. That's not to say I don't like the companions. I do like them. But they're not memorable characters. They have no interesting quirks, no quotable or amusing dialogue, and no agenda or opinion that ever conflicts with your character. Even their disagreements with each other are polite, and invariably they talk it out and they become friends. Only Tosh is somewhat surly in general and actually downright rude to her mother. But the game gives her a pass on that. The game gives them a pass on that because they are grappling with what they want their pronouns to be. Let me hasten to point out that I have zero issue with whatever pronouns make them comfortable. But I do have little patience with clumsy writing. There were far more graceful ways they could have conveyed the point they were making. After all, Dragon Age has always had gay and non-binary characters. They were just better written. But I would also argue that it felt pretty contrived that this would be Tosh's main concern in the middle of trying to stave off the world literally being destroyed. As for the romances that BioWare is famous for, well, there's really nothing to say about those because I found the one that I tried to be a giant nothing burger. There was so little interaction or special dialogue that it made no difference to my game whatsoever. In Act 3, the action does pick up considerably. You get a sense of urgency, and the closer you get to the penultimate scene, the more the game begins to feel like a Dragon Age game. Although there were emotional moments earlier in the game, the sense of urgency is not there earlier in the game, and I think that's in part because every team meeting with your companions consists of Rook asking everyone how they feel, and everyone talking about being emotionally distracted with their own personal stuff. Really? That's what you'd be focusing on if the world was ending and you had one chance to save it? Your feelings? And the ending I got, which I felt was the true ending, I was happy to see my Inquisitor interact with Solas again, to be standing with Morrigan and to see the redemption for Solas that I've been predicting for the last several years. I actually got emotional because it was so long in coming. I just thought it was way too short of a scene for so long of a wait. There is little sense of freedom in this game. It's very linear in both mission design and dialogue choices. It requires you to use polite language at all times, and the gritty, dark, fantasy, mature theme that Dragon Age is known for feels as though they've been reinterpreted for Veilguard by a middle school PTA committee. While there are interesting missions and a lot of cutscenes, there are no deeply moving narratives and almost all of the most profound action, events that radically change areas of Thedas where our companions and friends from previous games still live, takes place off camera and is conveyed to the player in easily missed codex entries and missives. This game basically erases the decisions you made in all of the previous 3 games, ignores or renders moot much of the lore, and oversimplifies the whole plot. The romances are underwritten and juvenile. The villains have been reduced to caricatures of what they are in the lore. And the companions are nice, but nice is such a shallow descriptor, but it's all I've got for them because they feel like they were written by folks who were raised on therapy and texting. They're all over concerned with how they feel all the time, when sometimes you just have to get on with the work of saving the world. I've been trying to see this game for what they intended it to be, since they clearly, purposefully pivoted away from the old lore, the old world, the old characters, and that darker tone. We waited over 10 years to see what happened with the characters and companions we were already attached to from Inquisition and the previous games. So they should have introduced their characters into that world, that tone, that lore, and to the characters already there, not push those characters aside. No matter what Veilguard has going for it, that was a fail. Look, despite everything I've said here, there's a lot to like in Veilguard. I'm grateful that I got to see the ending to a story that I love, that I've been waiting to see for a long time. If you love the Dragon Age world, do understand in playing it that you're getting a very generic but beautiful game wearing a Dragon Age paint job. I think Veilguard is burdened by the mantle of the Dragon Age name. I wish it was a game set in the Dragon Age world instead of being the direct sequel to Inquisition and Trespasser. As it is, I think it fails to reach the bar that it should have. That's it for me. I wish it was better. I wish I loved it. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. And as always, enjoy your day.